just briefly wanted to welcome Jon Landaw to our virtual Gompa, our virtual center. It's a real privilege for me to be able to introduce him to everyone tonight. He's one of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's first students back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. So he spent a lifetime studying and practicing in our tradition, and he's written a number of books also. So he's a really celebrated scholar and practitioner. So we're really thrilled that he was able to share some of that knowledge with us this evening, and he'll also be back in early May to do a weekend on how to meditate. So that's wonderful. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to your teachings.
Thank you, Venerable. So it's very nice to be here, virtually, that is. And thank you for having me. I want to give a little bit of background as to how this evening came to be, at least from my point of view. I was kindly invited to lead one of these public talks at Thupten Norbu Ling, and I didn't really know what would be appropriate to speak about, so I asked for a list of possible questions or things that students may have shown interest in. And I got a list of 6 or 7 different items, and one of them, the one I chose, one of them appealed to me because it reminded me, at least tangentially, of something that I had heard Lama Yeshe say many, many years ago that made a big impression on me. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to what it was that Lama Yeshe said, and what that context was, and then see if it relates at all to the topic that I chose for tonight. And I also want to add that if this topic doesn't create any really great interest, if it's too specific or not specific enough, as long as I'm here this evening, I'm very, very happy to entertain any questions you may have. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that I'll be able to answer any question you have. There's lots of questions that I myself have that I haven't come up with answers yet. But if it's something that I think I can speak about based on some of the teachings I've heard from my own teachers and so forth, I would be happy to address them. So keep that in the back of your mind, because later, when we ask for questions, if there are no questions on the topic that was chosen for tonight, then feel free to ask a question from any of these other topics. And if I can answer them, I will. If I can, I'll evade the question. Okay. So the thing that Lama Yeshe, the specific thing that Lama Yeshe had said so many, many years ago that made such a big impression on me, this occurred in India while I was receiving teachings in India, and myself and many of the other people who were attending those teachings at that time were about to leave India and go back to the West and pursue education or a job or something like that. And a lot of us were wondering, well, while I'm here living, let's say in Dharamsala, for example, while I'm living in Dharamsala, I don't have anything else to do, so I can spend as much time as I want studying the Dharma, attending teachings, and so forth. But I know that when I go back home, back to America or Europe or wherever it might be, I'm not going to have that kind of leisure. I'll either be in school or getting a job or looking for a job or involved in many, many other activities. And so the question came up, if I go home and if I am able to find a job, how can I balance my desire to uh, uh, get further in my Buddhist studies and practice with the demands of the job? That's a paraphrase of basically the question that was put forth to Lama, and he answered it in what I found a very interesting way. He said, uh, different jobs make different demands on people. So, for example, if the um, job is such that you spend a lot of time by yourself, if you don't have to interact so much with coworkers or clients or so forth, then during that period of time, you can think about whatever it is in the Dharma that you have been studying, whatever the topic might be, whether it's impermanence or emptiness or precious human rebirth or any of these topics. If that's what you have been studying about, if that's what you've been meditating on, then when you're alone, when you don't have any other demands, you can just continue to focus on those items. Right? He said, however, virtually any job that you have in any sphere brings you in contact with other people. That's the most common thing. Right? And if that's the case, then it's your meeting with the other people that is your Dharma practice. It's not separate from your Dharma practice. It's not you're studying Dharma with one part of your life and then you're interacting with people on the other. You're taking whatever it is that you know or whatever you've developed, whatever your understanding has been, and you apply it to meeting that particular person. Now, that person might be a coworker, it could be your boss, it could be a customer, but whoever it is, it's just another person, another human being whom, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama never tires of saying, just like everyone else, simply wants to be happy and wants to avoid suffering. So when you're dealing with other people, keep that paramount in your mind, that whoever it is you're dealing with, whether they come as a friend or as someone that you're probably going to have some kind of conflict with, or the boss that you're going to have to please or worry about, no matter who it might be, in reality, that person, himself or herself, is just another human being like yourself. And so it's always appropriate to keep the teachings on loving kindness and compassion, and of course, the altruistic mind of bodhicitta, wishing to achieve some state of not only freedom from one's own suffering, but a full development of one's own mental and emotional powers to help that particular person. And that made a very, very big impression on me, because I know, just speaking about myself, I have this tendency to compartmentalize my life. There's part of my life which I was going to say in which I do work, but I really don't do any work. There's part of my life in which I'm supposed to be doing work. That's a bit more accurate, you know. And then there's the part of my life in which I'm just goofing off, fooling around. And then there's part of my life in which I'm being entertained, you know. And then there's the part of my life which I remember that everyone I meet is just a brother or sister. That's all they are, no matter how they're appearing. And if that's the case, then the Dharma has a lot of things to say, a lot of things to keep in mind on how to relate to them in a way that is pure Dharma, even if no Dharma words at all are spoken in the interchange. Like it's not necessary to use Buddhist terminology, to make references to specific teachings even, for the conversation to be Dharma-based. As long as one's keeping the motivation of loving kindness and compassion in mind, as long as one is looking for some kind of, I'll use this word, some kind of success in the interchange that has nothing to do with worldly success, but just as to whether we've made some kind of meaningful heart connection with another person who, like oneself, is just wandering, looking for happiness, experiencing a lot of frustration, and wishing to overcome difficulty. So that made a very big impression on me. You know, it changed. It wasn't as if there was anything new in what Lama said, but he really focused the attention on why is it that we do interact with people. And we're always interacting, almost always interacting with people, certainly at least in our thoughts. But you know, whether we go shopping and are speaking to the cashier, or going to making a deposit in the bank, or any other activity, it's another human being that we're connecting with. And even being able to bring that to mind briefly can change the whole tenor, the whole taste, the whole flavor of the interaction. So, for example, if the person that we're interacting with has a kind of a very a frown on his or her face, seems to be in a rush, is kind of short in the way in the way they speak to us, you know, doesn't use language very gently, right? Then instead of thinking, oh, this person is attacking me, you know, I'm the good guy here, that's the bad guy over there, so I better get my defenses up, right? Instead of thinking that way, think, well, I don't know what's been going on in this person's life in the last 30 minutes or so. Maybe he just had a very, very difficult interaction with another customer, with another coworker, with someone else. And it's just coming out. It's not a personal attack against me. This person, even if he's not acting so skillfully at the moment, still wants to have a happy life. And just thinking that can, often that's just enough for us to hold on to any harsh words or harsh thoughts we might be cultivating towards that person. Just hold on to them, you know, not act on them immediately, and then find some kind of opening for giving a better energy to that person. Like, for example, maybe, and this I think happens quite a lot, maybe during that person's day, no one has ever smiled at him or her. It's possible. If they have a very hectic job, if they work in the complaint departments of a department store, it's very likely that they've just had one complaint, one difficulty after another. So just simply smiling, gently smiling, you know, at that person might be something that really is meaningful, that really opens up an ability to contact on a truly human level. And I feel that to a very, very large extent, this is the real practical practice of Dharma. Not that I can always remember it. I mean, self-cherishing comes up all the time, right? A lot of times, instead of looking out for the welfare of the other person, I'm just looking out for the welfare of me, I. You know? But if I can remember those words of Lama Yeshe that we're always interacting with another person, and that is the arena of our Dharma practice, then it can be very helpful in reminding me, reminding us how we can transform whatever that interaction is into a beneficial experience, what we might call a real Dharma interaction. So that's what I was reminded of. That what I just told you now is a very expanded version of what it was that Lama Yeshe said, 30 odd years ago. But that was the impression it made on me. And so when I looked at the list of questions that had been suggested that I might talk about, I chose a topic which seemed to be a little bit close to that. Whether it really was or not, I don't know. As I recall, the topic was how to balance formal study of the Dharma with compassionate action. Is that, Venerable Losang, was that pretty close? I didn't have it in front of me, so I wasn't sure. So there is some kind of connection between that memory I had that made such an impact on me by what Lama had said so many years ago, and that question, but I don't know how well I can address the actual question itself. So maybe at this point, if anyone has some thoughts of how to approach this topic, the stated topic, the formal practice, the formal study of the Dharma, and the engaging in compassionate action. If that actually brings up in your own mind a question or a comment that you may have, some kind of something you can bring to this conversation, that would be very, very helpful. I think on my screen, I can't really follow too much how you signal, but if you raise your hand or click on the I have a question button, I'm sure one of us will find it.
Yeah, Barbara has raised her hand.
Who did?
Barbara.
Barbara.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Oh,
for
there
your
you are. Hi, Barbara. I didn't see you at first.
Thank you so much for your teaching this evening. Something that I learned from a teacher, and it wasn't a Buddhist teacher, that has really been helpful to me is like when I will have the thought that is a negative thought, something like, oh my gosh, what a jerk that person is. I stop and I pause and I think of 3 times that I can come up with where I have been a jerk. So any negative thought that comes up, or sometimes a positive one, gosh, that person was so generous or whatever, then I can pause and think of 3 ways. And it doesn't matter what it is. You can come up with 3 things, positive or negative. And that has really, oh gosh, what a jerk. It really brings it home that, you know what? I'm not any different than that person because I can come up with examples where I have been a jerk. So I don't know. That's just something that has been helpful for me.
No, that's truly excellent, isn't it? I mean, we have within the Lojong thought transformation teachings, we have a saying, exchanging self for others, right? And what Barbara was just saying is kind of based on a recognition that there is no concrete barrier between who and what we are and who and what everyone else might be. You know, if we've been studying Lowick, you know, there's the 6 major consciousnesses and 51, however many secondary mental attitudes. Who doesn't have a whole slew of those? You know, we don't own all the positive ones. The negative ones don't just belong to the people that we don't like or who are attacking us, right? There's a human basis for us being able to make the exchange between self and others. And the more that we identify tightly, this is me, this is mine, you know, that's somebody else. That person is fundamentally different. The more we're just creating more difficulty for ourselves and others. And thank you, Barbara. I think that's a very helpful way of approaching that. Mm-hmm. Anything else? I don't want you to put you on the spot, Shayla, but do you have something on your mind? It just looks from this distance as if there's wheels turning in your head and like you're thinking of something that might be really helpful to say or interesting anyway.
I was just trying to think of anything that I've ever tried, but I'm coming up blank.
Oh, I know that one.
A little bit more on that.
The other thing that I was a little concerned about, you know, when I chose that question, as I said, I chose it because it resonated somehow with something that Lama Yeshe had said. So I thought there might be some carryover. But one of the things I was worried about was the question is posed in terms of, you know, how to balance formal study with, you know, human interaction, you know, compassionate action. And I really wasn't sure what kind of formal study people might have in mind, you know. And even if they do have a formal study as part of their, you know, let's say in their daily schedule, they put aside a certain amount of time for, let's say, reading a Lamrim text, for example, or going through a sutra, you know, something that you could consider formal study. If that's the case, how many minutes or hours a day is spent in that? Now, when I was living in Dharamsala, I didn't really have anything else to do but study the Dharma. The housemate I had was engaged in writing a doctoral thesis, and the topic was the Lamrim. And I was quite new to India, and I was very interested in all of this. So I was helping out by typing up and writing up the notes. So, and that occupied most of our so-called free time. I really had no other obligations in India. There was no movie theaters, no television or anything. So studying the Dharma, writing it, typing it, and so forth was basically what I did. But when I think of formal study, that kind of situation that I was in India, I think is very, very rare. I mean, even for me now, it's extremely rare. You know, at that time, I didn't have a family. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. Didn't have any prospects for any of those things. So Dharma study was basically what I did. I mean, putting aside indulging in the self-cherishing attitude, that was actually my main occupation, but my secondary occupation was studying the Dharma, right? And I was trying to think, maybe this question is so personal to individual people. Because let's say if someone does have a very formal practice of the Dharma, and it occupies an hour or two every day, or maybe a little bit more, that would be a lot, right? For most people, that would be quite a lot. It would be a lot for me now. It was nothing for me, 30 years ago, but for now, to put aside even a half an hour of formal study Dharma is much more difficult. But if someone does have a formal practice and they have an idea how long it takes, then what is the difficulty of balancing that with compassionate action? I mean, let's say you do 3 hours, expand it. Say you do 3 hours of formal study a day, and then you sleep for whatever it is, 7, 8 hours at night, and then you eat the different meals that you have. All the rest of the time, and even some of that time, is open for engaging in compassionate action, isn't it? So it may not be a real problem. So I was trying to think of, getting my mind around this question. Is it really a significant obstacle for people to balance their study or their practice of the Dharma with their interaction to other people? And I couldn't see how it could be that much of a problem in terms of time availability, right? Because even an extended amount of time, like 3 hours a day, still leaves plenty of time for interaction with other people, right? So I was wondering, maybe I don't really have a handle on what this problem of finding balance is. So if anyone here can relate to the problem of finding a balance between study and this, then how do you think about it? And then we can see if we can address that. Lou, did you want to offer something? Yeah.
I'm actually retired, and I spend and I live by myself, so I spend quite a bit of time doing Dharma.
Yeah.
The biggest problem with being able to practice compassion is COVID. And I have one problem, so I can't interact. I can't do the interacting that would allow me to practice compassion other than, say, online. But in-person compassion is a very rare thing for me. So I just try to be nice whenever there's an interaction in the outside world. I just always try to make the most of it, but it doesn't happen that often. And for groceries, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And I go to my daughter's house twice every other Thursday. So, but I just don't get a lot of time. It's not a matter of time; it's a matter of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's a matter of actually getting out of the house.
I think, from my vantage point, I think that's with certain variations. I think that's a challenge that hundreds, thousands, millions of people are facing now. It's like where I live, I'm less than 2 miles away from some of my closest friends who, before COVID, I used to see quite regularly. And since COVID, since the pandemic, very few of them have I been able to see with any regularity for the kind of reasons, similar reasons to what Lou was expressing. You know? And what was strange, and I don't know exactly how to understand this, but even though there is still other ways of communicating with these people, telephone or um, virtually or so forth, I find that I, I can tend to get out of practice of the human contact and am even loath to phone or to send a or meet them on some media site or whatever, and I don't fully understand it, but it's as if some human quality is atrophying. Does that make any sense? And I have a bunch of very close friends, especially one in particular who lives in New York City. And she'd been telling me that she just feels when she goes through the city a heavy gloom, that it seems like violence is just under the surface, that there's a whole level of mistrust. And the one way that I can kind of feel it viscerally in myself is that in the past, if I meet a person that I'm close to, or even someone that I'm not that close to, but I have a strong fellow feeling for, it was always so easy to give them a hug. Really easy. And now, even with people that I'm very close with, there's something that it's like, should I be doing this? There's a certain reluctance, not because I like the people any less, but because there's this whole other level of, I guess you could say, fear. I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does anyone else have similar experiences?
Yes, it does make sense, because
Yeah.
the fear it's not like I say to myself, well, I don't want to hug this person because I might get COVID. It's just that fear is in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And it just inhibits you. Before COVID, I loved hugs.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I miss the most.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting when someone with great sensitivity and artistic ability writes a social history of this period of time that we're still in, how they describe it. Because I remember reading accounts, at least some accounts through my interest in literature, especially English literature. There was a lot written about what it was like living through, like, the Black Death, which killed at least a quarter of the population of Europe, maybe twice that amount. And I wonder whether any of the accounts written about what was happening, 2020, 21, 22, when any of the accounts that are eventually written, whether they will ring true to people who lived through them, or whether they'll be considered fantastic or exaggerated. People didn't want to give their friends hugs, it's like, and that was a problem. But I think it is a problem. It is a problem. I think the Dalai Lama is fond of quoting the statement that human beings are social animals, not not emphasizing the animal part, but the social part, right? that it's isolation, separation, which is the biggest obstacle to living life as what we call a real human being. Because the isolation cuts us off from something fundamental to being human. And that's a very big challenge. That's a very, very big challenge, isn't it? I think that for me, if I were to rephrase the question that I chose, it isn't the challenge isn't finding time to balance formal study of the Dharma with human kindness and compassion. It's how to be able to express that human kindness and compassion, and not let it atrophy, not be able to find a way to cut through that, because I think, as certainly looking around, reading the news and things like that, it seems like it's something that's being experienced on a very deep level by, I can't say it's the majority of people, but it certainly seems like a lot of people. And people express their unhappiness with it in so many different ways. Like, a lot of people don't have any way of expressing unhappiness and frustration other than lashing out at, you know. So if you're a Democrat, you lash out at the Republicans. If you're a Republican, you lash out at the Democrats. You know, if you're a fascist, you lash out at the communists. It's just, you know, if you sit on this side of the aisle, you lash out at the people on the other side. If you root for this football team, you lash out at the people who root for the other football team. You know, it's just a lot of people, they don't have any other way of dealing with frustration in their life other than directing it outwards. And I think one of the key things of the Dharma, whether we're successful in this or not, is it's actually a reflection of what Barbara said, is that when we see something, instead of immediately going to us versus them mentality, we think, how is the them really us? You know, that behavior that I don't like, that I see outside, to what extent is actually that a reflection of my behavior, my attitude? And that's not necessarily what I would call formal practice of the Dharma, you know, but I think it's essential practice of the Dharma to be able to look at things in that way, you know, to see, you know, as it says in the Lojong teachings, you know, that the put all the blame on one object. I can't quote it exactly, but put all the blame on one, something like that. And what they mean is, if there's a problem, the root of it is self-cherishing. And so you can't overcome self-cherishing by going around saying, you're wrong, you're the bad guy, I'm the good guy, you know. So Dharma practice in that sense is owning that fellow feeling. You know? Does that? I'm kind of this stuff is kind of spilling out, and I'm not sure how much of it makes sense. But does anyone want to kind of qualify that, or add to that, or speak from a point of view of the experience that you've had that might make this a bit more, you know, maybe communicate on a better level? Oh, yeah. Or we can talk about the Oscars. I think they're being given Sunday night, aren't they? Which means nothing to me because I haven't seen any of the pictures. Mary, did you want to say something?
I'd like to read um, what's in the chat from Elizabeth in New York City.
Oh, please.
Okay. Living in a big city, New York, and using mass transit, subway and bus on a daily basis has offered me amazing opportunities to fold Dharma into countless interactions, no matter how minute, with others with a kind word or a smile. Aware that this may be the only time I'll ever meet this particular person in this lifetime, and wanting to make the most of this fleeting encounter, the desire to leave a positive imprint.
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it? That's really beautiful. You know, remember there used to be an expression some decades ago: commit random acts of kindness. Do you remember that? I think it may even have been a bumper sticker, you know, instead of random acts of violence, a random act of kindness, you know, a kindness that no one's expecting you to do. There's no obligation to do it. As Mary was quoting, you know, from that thing that she was reading, you might never even see this person ever again, you know. So it's a totally random act, but it changes everything, doesn't it? And most especially, in my experience, it changes what's going on in me. You know, knowing that I could have spoken to this person in a rough way or an unfeeling way, and instead of doing that, I came up with something, some kind of gesture of fellow feeling, creates a whole different world. Yeah. You know, I see at least two, maybe three names here of people that I know. I know Venerable Thupten Themo, I'm sure that's her. And the other name is Steve Worley. And it could be it's another Steve Worley, but I think this is an old friend of mine from the Santa Cruz area. I wonder if either of you have anything brilliant you want to, any life preserver you want to throw me at this point. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we go to Plan B. Plan B is any other comment, any other topic whatsoever. And Mary has something.
Well, Venerable Pamo has unmuted.
Oh, she has.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
You just reminded me something with the random acts of kindness.
Yeah.
I was flying from Europe, I think, to the United States, and I was changing planes. And we were waiting online to board, and it was probably the 1990s. So I had a water bottle that I brought on the airplane. And this little lady was standing in line near me, and the American woman saying, "Oh, I really need to drink. I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. I have to drink something. I need water." And there wasn't any water for her to drink. So I gave her my water bottle. And she was so thankful and so happy. She was praising me as the best, kindest person she ever met in her life. I was the kindest person she met in her life. I was like, I changed her whole life, you know, just to give her a sip of water. And I gave her the whole bottle because I couldn't drink it after her mouth. But she was so thankful. And, you know, that was just a simple act of kindness that, you know, I recognized that she was in need and nobody was giving her water.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't really take that much to change the atmosphere, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It does take something. It takes It takes a certain amount of bravery, because sometimes if you're in a situation where people aren't being particularly kind to one another, an act of kindness might seem almost like an attack. In other words, you're not staying on your side of the border, right? You mean it well, but in certain circumstances, you might be loath to express it because it might be rejected, or it might be, that you're being very forward, to use an old expression, you know. But when we can get past that, there is a chance that it'll be a human being meeting another human being. It won't be any kind of weird interaction. Thank you, Pema. Yes, Mary.
Thank you so much for this teaching, Jon. I don't know if this is a lifesaver or a question, but I loved hearing when you were talking about Lama Yeshe. And I guess I'm just wondering if you have any memories of some particular examples of when Lama Yeshe was particularly compassionate, or just any type of stories from that time when you were there with him.
I only have a few thousand stories of Lama Yeshe, and I repeated many of them so many times. Yeah, for those of you who'd actually never met him, or haven't seen enough videos to get a feeling for what he was like, other than reading his teachings, he was truly an extraordinary, radiant being, and there was one expression that he very often used when he was teaching to a group. He would be saying something, and maybe a question would come up from the audience, and he would address it in very, very broken English, right? But very, very incisive. So he would say something in relationship to the question or whatever it was that was brought up. And then very frequently, right after that, he would look the person in the eye and say, "We communicating, dear? Are we communicating? Did you catch what I was saying? Did it make sense to you?" Like that. But the way he said it was, "We communicating, dear?" Like that. And when he said that, it was as if, he was kind of like looking right into the person. And I often thought that was his biggest passion. His biggest passion was making contact. Actually, it's interesting that this should be the example that comes up, because we're talking about how the relative lack of human contact, which so much of the world has been under in the last 2 years or so, is such a heavy burden. And what Lama Yeshe's passion was, at least from my point of view, was to make contact. And he would do that in so many different ways. Like, I don't mean to be disrespectful at all when I say this, but Lama Yeshe was a big flirt. He'd be walking down the street, and a lot of his students would be there, so it'd be kind of a group of people, and maybe going from one store to the other because he liked shopping. And then he would see somebody across the street and he would make this eye contact with the person and this beam, this big smile. It was, yeah, I mean, without the sexual connotations to it, he was flirting with this person, and he was being very seductive in a sense. It was hard to resist. If Lama Yeshe was showing you that energy, it was hard to resist. And you didn't want to resist, right? So I think that's not one specific story, but all of us who knew Lama saw him do that on many, many occasions, and it was extraordinary the how he was able to magnetize people to him in that respect. And it was never for, he was never wanting something from the other person. He just wanted to love them, And it was very true with babies and animals and men and women. There was no barriers. He was a monk. He was a very good monk, following all the Vinaya and everything. But his bodhicitta trumped his Vinaya, if you know what I mean. In other words, if it was the human contact was what was necessary, then whether it was a man, a woman, an old person, a young person, he would just give the loving embrace in whatever form it needed to take. Mm. But let's see, where are we now? Oh, 5, 7. We still have about another half hour, I think, according to my watch. Okay. If there are no more questions or comments or things to pursue, we can cut this short. We don't have to go on, but I'm very happy to stay and share whatever you people would like to share. But I can't. The biggest problem that I have, one of the biggest problems I have, is that not being Lama Yeshe or any of the other great teachers that I've had, I don't have clairvoyance. And it's quite clear that lamas like Lama Yeshe, for example, not to mention all the other wonderful lamas that we've had a very highly developed clairvoyance. That one didn't need to articulate a question, right? They could hear the question, whether you spoke it or not. One example that I can come up with, this example relates to a Lama that many of you probably didn't know. He was one of the assistant tutors of the Dalai Lama, Serkang Rinpoche, wonderful Lama. And my very close friend, when we were living in Dharamsala, eventually developed very good Tibetan. So a lot of times when people had a question of the lamas, they would go to my friend, and he would accompany them to Serkang Rinpoche, and then he would translate the question for the lama. And on this one particular occasion, what I'm thinking of now specifically is that this Western who had a question met with my friend for a while beforehand, because he knew it was going to be a little bit difficult to get the question out completely. So he explained to my friend the questions that he had. And he in fact listed, I think it was about 5 or 6 questions that he had. And then after that, then later, they went in and actually met Sarkam Rinpoche. And while they were there with Sarkam Rinpoche, Sarkam Rinpoche answered all the questions that the person had before my friend even had a chance to translate them. So somehow, either he could read my friend's notes upside down in English, which is impossible, or what was on this person's mind, and also on the mind of my friend as the translator, was being communicated clairvoyantly. There are many other examples like that, but that was the strongest example that I heard about because of my friendship with the translator. He told me exactly, word for word, that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And some of you may have studied a text by Atisha, Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment. It's kind of the prototype of all of the subsequent Lama literature. And in it, at one point, Atisha says, recommends developing single-pointed concentration, shamatha, because one of the not offshoots, one of the results of developing shamatha is you develop a greater and greater ability to read other people's minds, to know what they're actually thinking. And that's important because that gives you an insight into what the person really wants to know. So instead of just relating to them on the level of words, which often don't express a person's actual intentions or desires, you're able to pick up on what it is that they really want, what it is they really need, and address them that way. And I remember asking, or I was in a class at some point in which somebody, probably not me, asked a question like, well, how specifically do you develop this kind of clairvoyance? And the answer, the very simple answer was, you really pay attention to other people. Seems like kind of obvious, you said, but the more you actually pay attention to someone else, the more you can actually pick up even the unsaid things that they're thinking. I do have one experience of my own to relate. So maybe it's appropriate here. On my first visit to Kopan, where Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa gave their November meditation course, I was asked by Lama Yeshe, because I had been studying for a couple of years, if I wouldn't mind being there for some question and answer sessions. And I thought, since I was a very new student myself, I didn't really have anything to say, but if Lama Yeshe wanted me to do that, of course I would. And so after a while, because I was introduced to different groups of people there, sometimes people would come up and ask me a question, as if I knew something. And sometimes if it was a very simple Dharma question, sometimes I actually knew what the academic answer was. But a lot of times I had no idea. And on this one occasion, there was this young woman, and she started just spilling her guts because some very deep emotional thing was happening to her. And she just started telling me about it. And I'm listening, and I'm getting very, very nervous, really nervous. I'm not sure whether I broke out into a sweat or not, but I might have. I was that nervous. The reason I was nervous was I realized after a while, this young woman is going to stop speaking and she's going to expect me to say something. And I have no idea whatsoever what to say. All the things that she was talking about were deep personal experiences, none of which I had had, you know. So there wasn't any way that I could address it from my personal experience or not. So all I could think of when she stopped speaking and I can't say anything in answer to it, it's going to be, what is she going to think of Jon? How embarrassing that's going to be. And fortunately, at that point, I caught myself and I realized, oh, so Jon, you're not worried that you can't answer the question. You're worried that she's going to think you're an even bigger jerk than you really are by not being able to answer it. So the only person you're really worried about here is Jon. Somehow or other, the presence of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe at that course allowed me to see what was happening directly. So I thought, okay, this self-cherishing, that's the cause of my problem here. So I just send Jon out of the room, just dismiss him. And that's what I did. Somehow, I just took all thoughts of me out of the equation. And then I don't know what I said. I have no idea what I said. Even at that time, I didn't really have any idea of what I said. But somehow or other, it was correct. It was helpful. It was as if, since I didn't have anything to say, Lama Yeshe decided to say it for me. And so it was from a source of wisdom that I didn't know I had, right? Because it was coming from the non-Jon place, right? And I think maybe that's how could I say that? I think maybe that's an element of the Mahayana teachings, isn't it? About the Buddha nature. That there is a source of wisdom. There is a reservoir of I don't mean intelligence, but a reservoir of actual wisdom that we all have access to. But it doesn't come through the ego. It doesn't come through me and my brilliance. It comes through, our speech and our body, but not from the point of view that we're relating to myself as a separate, concrete individual, but rather getting to a deeper level. And that experience at that time, which was now, half a century ago, was and remains one of the strongest Dharma experiences I ever had. That I was in trouble. I was in deep, deep trouble because this woman was being very real, and she was being very needy in a very deep sense. And I wanted to help her, but I had no idea how. So I decided to put the teachings into practice and, at least for a minute, put aside self-cherishing and just see what happens. It could have been the case I put it aside or attempt to put it aside and nothing happened. But in this case, something did happen. As I said, I don't know what it was. I don't remember a word of it, but somehow it was appropriate. And I think that's an extremely valuable lesson, isn't it? that if we're always relying on I, me, mine, we're going to mess up more often than not. But if we put I, me, mine to the side, there's a chance we could access a wisdom that we're not even really fully aware of. Does any of that make sense? Erin, do you think so?
John, Barbara has a question.
Wonderful. Oh, there she is.
The question I have is about clairvoyance, and you had referenced Lama Yeshe having clairvoyance. Now, his reincarnation is Lama Hita. Lama Uzel.
Tenzin Uzel. Yeah.
Does he then have that clairvoyance?
Wow, that's a very hard question for someone like me to answer. First of all, when I say that Lama Yeshe had clairvoyance, that's just what I feel from observing Lama Yeshe and other lamas, in action. Because I have a feeling if I were to ask any of them, did you really develop clairvoyance? Most of them would probably deny it, or they would say, oh, maybe a little bit, something like that, because they're not at all in the habit of spending much time talking about what they may have developed, with very few exceptions that I've, in my experience, right? So it's hard enough for me to actually be able to say Lama Yeshe had clairvoyance, and then take it another generation and say, therefore, does Lama Uzel, does he have clairvoyance? It gets too far removed for me to be able to talk about it, coherently. As well as the fact that what actually goes from one life to another is a big question. They talk about a continuity of consciousness, but how many of the things developed or generated on one level of consciousness manifests on another one? Hard to say. I don't think
that's probably what my question is.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that once one attains a certain level, that will then go to the next form. As in clairvoyance. And even if we don't know that Lama Yeshe was clairvoyant, just for my understanding, does clairvoyance transfer?
I don't know specifically about that. I have, what I'm about to say might be totally wrong, but I think a quality like that, you can, from one life to another, you can have a seed for it, a propensity for it. But I think you would still probably have to train in that lifetime in shamatha and single pointed concentration and whatever other practice you have to do to actually develop an active clairvoyance. You'd actually have to, though you might have a tendency in that direction or a seed in that direction, if you don't spend time cultivating it, in a meditative practice in that new life, now that you're in a new body, right? A new set of channels, winds and drops and all of those things. If you don't spend time actually actively cultivating it, maybe it's not developed. But that answer may be totally ridiculous. But that's as close as I can get to it. I know. I remember once speaking to Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he was talking about the incarnation of one of the great lamas from the 20th century, and I was saying, I have a chance to meet the reincarnation of that lama, And it was interesting because he was incredibly devoted to the predecessor of that Lama, right? That new one, incredibly devoted. But he kind of warned me against taking teachings or becoming devoted to the reincarnation until we saw of how he was going to develop in this lifetime. So it wasn't a matter that, even though this was an unmistaken incarnation, that he was going to have the same dependable qualities that the other one had. Still, it he could develop this way, might develop another way. And also, it's not just that these tulkus, these incarnations, exist in a vacuum, right? Whatever they are, they're social beings as well. And so whatever their upbringing, their education, their social influences and so forth, they also have an effect on how that tulku presents himself. But there are, as I said in the very beginning today, there's a lot of questions that can be asked that I myself ask, and I have no idea what the real answer is. And that kind of thing, what develops and carries over, as opposed to what develops and then just leads us a seed of instinct. That I can't answer. But if you find the answer, tell me.
So then I know, and I don't remember the name,
Yeah.
but the story of someone who reached enlightenment in one lifetime. Yep. It started with an M, but I don't remember.
Milarepa.
That's who, yes.
Yeah.
So then what you're saying is that that seed was there and he developed it, and that's why he was able to get enlightened in one lifetime, in that lifetime. Am I correct thinking?
Yeah, except Milarepa's case was interesting because in that particular lifetime that he became enlightened, he actually committed murders.
Right.
So
right.
he had a long way to go. He must
He did it.
He must have.
But he did it in that same
But he
life.
did it, yeah. Whereas we often think of someone who is coming into lifetime with some very good instincts, and then just has to develop them, and it's a great heroic thing to do. But in Milarepa's case, it was much more than that because he had a lot to overcome. Because he was responsible for the death of many humans and many animals. Because it's a whole story, but he was led astray. But his guru, through his devotion to his guru, was able to give him the kind of I was going to say the kind of hardships, the kind of tasks that allowed him to purify all that negativity. So instead of him doing ordinary purification practices, his guru Marpa gave him really, really difficult things to do. So much so that later on, Marpa said to him, he says, "Don't treat any of your disciples the way I treated you." But Milarepa needed that difficulty.
Thank you so much. These are just thoughts that I have.
Yeah.
And my understanding is, though, that once one is enlightened, a mind is enlightened, then there's no going back.
That is what is said. Yeah. How that enlightened mind manifests itself might not necessarily manifest as a completely enlightened being.
To the people around, or to the beings around.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But that enlightened mind doesn't ever revert.
Yeah. And in fact, there's a teaching which describes different stages of development, and in that teaching, it describes uh, uh, what are the thresholds for banishing different defilements, so that they never return. And there's kind of an explanation that the higher you go, the more of those defilements are completely banished. Before that time, you could weaken a defilement, but it might return. After that threshold, if you weaken it to a certain point, it will never return. That's what the teachings say. However, that person might manifest as if they had a defilement, if that was helpful. That's possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, but that's just that's a huge topic, and there's a lot about it that I can't even begin to address.
Jon, the next question is from Erin.
Oh, good.
Hi.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Erin.
I was just thinking, kind of when I saw the title of the teaching, which I can't remember now, but just thinking about, I'm not retired yet, and I do spend a lot of time on the computer, kind of writing reports and entering data and things. And I find it's a lot easier to try to work with the Dharma when I'm working with people.
Yeah.
But when I'm on the computer, I feel like I've become kind of a robot, and my day goes by and I haven't really like touched my heart. I was wondering if you might have any ideas on how to integrate the Dharma when I'm on the computer so much.
Well, if I do have good advice, I should give it to myself, because that is a challenge. But the answer that comes to my mind immediately, but I'm not sure it's going to be appropriate in this case, is the data that you're entering, is it in any way related to an activity which actually specifically benefits someone else? Because some of the activity is very removed from that. It's several steps between. Other activities, like if you're, I don't know, like if you're drawing plans for a new hospital, then the work you're doing is directly related to benefiting others. So there can be all kinds of different distances between the work you're doing on the computer and the ultimate aim of bringing benefit to others. But if you can think of a connection, if you can find realistically a connection between what you're tapping out on the computer and the possibility of, or even the probability that people are going to benefit as a result of whatever it is you're doing, then just articulating it in your own mind, just stating it to yourself. Typically that happens usually when we finish an activity and then we dedicate that activity to the welfare of others. Then you can think, okay, by the effort I put into writing this report, may the people down the line truly benefit from it, but expressed in your own words in terms of what that actually is. So I think it can be very hard to dedicate something kind of as you're typing, as you're making sure your spelling is correct and no typos and stuff. That might be very difficult, but as it takes shape and you're going to bring the work to a close, then it should be possible to dedicate it to a higher aim. But I don't know if that's an appropriate answer to what your experience is.
That's really helpful. I think the thoughts coming to me to have a little post-it note and write down, kind of my motivation dedication so that I can glance at it every once in a while and feel connected. I think that's great.
And
Nice.
I think that's across the board very, very helpful advice for ourselves. Whether we do it as a post-it note or whether we have a handy all-purpose dedication on our lips that we can always, say to ourselves or think about. That's probably one of the reasons why such emphasis put on memorizing prayers and so forth, is so that you have very well phrased things that you can go to direct the energy of any of your actions. I think that's related to that, and that's another area which I kind of fall short of, because there's only a limited number of these prayers and stuff that I've ever bothered to memorize, and but it would be helpful. Even actually, one of the things that's wonderful is that 4-line prayer, the first 2 lines being refuge and the last 2 lines being bodhicitta, that was one of the first ones I memorized, and I think probably even very new students can memorize that very, very quickly, even in Tibetan, but certainly in English. And having that prayer of refuge and bodhicitta together in a very, very digestible and easily memorizable form is really helpful. Because if one is a Dharma student, especially from the Mahayana point of view, it is refuge and bodhicitta. That's it. Everything else is contained in that. And then if we can express it completely in our own words in a way that even communicates it better to ourselves, that's wonderful. But if we can't do that, at least we have these ready-made prayers that are so profound.
John, there are 2 more questions in chat.
Oh, good.
Okay. The first one way of thinking about this might be, if we accept that inner transformation is the goal, then can what a person believes is compassionate action, like being motivated to get involved in politics or spending most of one's time and energy to create outward change, be co-opted by the ego and be what might be more like the Buddha might call a thicket of views, and how to prevent that? And that's Venerable Dundrup.
I'm sorry, that was from Venerable Dundrup, that question? Almost any Dharma activity can be co-opted by self-cherishing and afflictions. Meaning, there can be an action which could be done with a great motivation, and you could be saying to yourself, I am doing this for the best motivation, but actually it's so easy for ego involvement to sneak in there and co-opt it. Do I have to explain what I mean by that, or is that clear? Maybe it's not clear. There's some verses in in a very commonly recited teaching on thought transformation, which talks about engaging in these Dharma actions, but engaging in them without falling into the trap of the 8 worldly concerns. And I think the reason that that advice is given is because it's so easy to do it. You think you're doing something and you intend to do something with a really pure motivation, the benefit of other beings, not just the temporary, but the ultimate benefit of other beings. But at some point, it could be co-opted by, it's like the nursery rhyme, what a good boy am I. Look at me, I'm a budding bodhisattva, I'm doing this for other people. And you give yourself a gold star, right? So maybe what's happened is it looks good, it sounds good, but maybe it's just a refined form of self-cherishing. So that can be an obstacle. And I think the only way to deal with it is just to be aware that it can come up, right? But also, I think we have to be gentle with ourselves. Because like we've been, according to the teachings, we've been in samsara for a really long time. This isn't the first time we've gone around, with these delusions. So there's a lot, there's a lot of that energy that's there. So at least we're trying to break free from it. But of course, it's not going to work all the time. Our motivation isn't going to be 100% pure all the time. Self-cherishing will come up again and again. But if we don't buy into it, if we pretend it's not happening, or if we're not aware it's happening when it is happening, that's a problem. So, Lama Yeshe used to say, two of his sayings that became very popular was, one was be gentle with yourself. By being gentle with yourself, you can be gentle with others. So a certain amount of forgiving our own weaknesses, right? And then the other statement was, good enough, dear. Good enough, dear. It's like any effort that we make, it may not be perfect. It may not be what a high-level bodhisattva can accomplish. But if it's directed in that same aim, then it's good enough, dear. But I think you said there was another question as well.
Yes. Apologies in advance for the lopsidedness of this question. Given that all is empty from its own side, including a person's very subtle mental continuum, the spark of consciousness that moves from one lifetime to another, is this the case, nevertheless, that every strand of mental continuum remains unique in that it is imbued with the specific karmic imprints of countless past lifetimes?
I think the answer is yes. Streams of consciousness are individual. There are spiritual traditions which phrase their higher understanding in that at some point everything merges into one. All is one. But I don't think Buddhism says that. This strand, the continuity of an individual stream of consciousness retains its individuality, its separateness on some level. Venerable Losang, is that what you understand?
Yeah, I think it gets complicated when you talk about enlightened, because everyone who's enlightened has done the same thing, and yet there is still a unique karmic history, but they've all kind of ended up in the same place. But then, of course, they talk about the power of the individual vows and prayers and how that might, so I think I think it's my answer usually to most questions is it's complicated. I think at the point of enlightenment, it gets pretty complicated.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even before, just to think of, because I think a lot of us have been exposed to thoughts that, there's this separateness that we experience. There's something wrong with that. And once we get over it, we'll see that we are, in a very, very real sense, all one. We can interpret that as like just making soup out of everything. And I don't think that's what the Buddhist teachings say. But it's difficult, any thought about what actually happens in Buddhahood is difficult for a mind that's, still trying to emerge from the Jurassic Park. One more thing to add. I remember hearing, and for some reason I found this helpful, that they always say that if there are two enlightened beings, or if there's two Buddhas, they have equal powers, like equal omniscience and so forth. But what they don't have equally, and I'm not sure I'm quoting it correctly, but what they don't have equally is their ability to help specific sentient beings. That ability depends on vows, and I think you indicated that, vows they made while they were still bodhisattvas. So one of the reasons why we have to become enlightened, even though there's been Maitreya and Shakyamuni and Amitabha and countless other Buddhas have appeared, the reason why we have to is that in our career of emulating a bodhisattva, we develop connections, karmic connections, that they hadn't developed. And it's not that they hadn't developed because we have a power that they don't. It's just that in our evolution, we've made karmic contact with people, friends, enemies, strangers, in different ways. And upon our attainment of enlightenment, that will ripen in our ability to help those particular beings in a way that the great Buddhas of the past weren't able to do. Not because they lacked the ability, but because there was some connection that hadn't been forged when they were on the bodhisattva path. I'm not sure what I just said, how accurate it is, but I think it reflects the understanding that I'd heard some of my teachers express. Okay. Mary, where did you go? Oh, there, Mary. According to my time, we're out, aren't we? Okay. Well, thank you for your patience with my blather. And if there's anything that has been said here, either by myself or any of the contributions that anyone made, or any of the things that have gone on in our head as we've been listening to all of this, if there's any of that that was actually helpful, that has some value, then may it not fade, but may it be developed so that we can be of maximum benefit to others. And if there's anything that was said which actually came from ignorance or misunderstanding, may that leave no mark as a finger writing on water, leaves no impression. So the things which are helpful, may it be like engraving into stone, that which is not helpful, may it wash away like the finger writing in water. Okay. So thank you so much. It was pleasant taking this trip to at least to some parts of New Mexico and other parts of the world. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.